The next part of our lesson, we're going to be talking about coterminal angles, which we've actually touched on a little bit in the previous section. So when we're talking about a coterminal angle, it's angles that are going to be in the same standard position. Okay? So which is why it's important that we were drawing those arrows in our previous video. So if I draw in an angle of 60 degrees, so that's what this is saying, a coterminal angle to that would be if I went the opposite way around. So if I went negative 300 degrees, this terminal side would still be sitting in the exact same position. Or let's say that I went 420 degrees. So I would have gone from this spot, I would have gone around once and then another bit to get back to 60. So the 360 plus 60 would be the 420. That would also be in this same position. Okay. So coterminal angles are really important because it allows us to evaluate smaller angles when we start getting really, really big. Again, when we start talking about that unit circle. Okay. Now, if we go back to our previous page in our notes and look at these, so you can see I've added in the ones that you were supposed to do for your practice. Okay. Now, if we're talking about a coterminal angle, the easiest one would be its negative. So on this one, we went a positive 45 degrees, but if I went this direction around, that negative, to get it into the same position, this would be negative 315. So that means that 45 and negative 315 would be considered coterminal angles. Okay? And the opposite is true. If I start with a negative angle and I want it's positive, so if I went this way around, okay, so instead of negative 200, the positive version of this would be 160 degrees. Okay? And the way that I'm getting that, so for this one, I just took 45 and I subtracted 360. Okay, so if I have a negative angle, I would take that negative angle and then I would add 360 to it. Okay, so that's where I'm getting that 160 from. Okay. Again, same thing. So this one, if I took 130 and I subtracted 360, so that means that I'm going this direction. That would give me, let's see, what is that, negative 230? So again, those would be considered coterminal angles. Okay, so now that we kind of have a picture, let's go back to our other page. Okay. So again, when we are looking at this, we don't need to draw the picture. We can just add and subtract our 360 number. And we're doing that number because that's how many degrees are in a circle. So if we're making one full revolution, we have to go 360 degrees. So anytime we're asked to find the smallest positive coterminal angle, that is always referring to an angle between 0 and 360. Okay, so whenever we're talking about the smallest positive coterminal angle, we want a number between 0 and 360. So if I have a really big number, we're just going to keep subtracting 360 until we get to a number that is between 0 and 360. Okay. Now all the numbers along the way would also be considered coterminal, but they wouldn't be the smallest. Okay. And if we had a negative number, we would just keep adding 360. So for example, let's say I had negative 500. Okay, so instead of subtracting, I would add 360. Oh my goodness, can't write today. 360. So negative 500 plus 360 would be a negative 140. So I'm not there yet, so I would need to add 360 again. So if I added 360 one more time, that would be 220 degrees. So the negative 500 and this 220 are coterminal, and the 220 would be the smallest positive coterminal angle. Okay. Now, if the question is asking us to find two coterminal angles, there should be one positive and one negative with a given angle. That just means that I'm going to take 40 and I'm going to add 360 to it. So that would be 400. Okay. And then if I wanted a negative one, I would take 400 and then I would subtract 360. I'm sorry, I said 400, I meant 40. So 40 minus 360 would be negative 320. Okay, so this would be my positive coterminal angle and a negative coterminal angle. Now those aren't the only correct numbers. We could have added 360 twice, or we could have subtracted 360 twice. That part doesn't really matter. Typically though, we're just going to add and subtract 360 once to whatever number we're given. So again, for the next one, if we're talking about negative 15, I can start by adding 360 to that. So that would give me a 345. And then if I wanted a negative one, I would take my negative 15 and then I would subtract 360. So that would give me negative 375. Now again, if it's asking for the smallest positive coterminal angle, this is going to be something between 0 and 360. So if we have a big number, we're going to keep adding 360 until we get to something between that 0 and 360. And then if it's negative, we're going to add until we get to a number between 0 and 360. So again, guys, I want you to pause the video. Go ahead and do these practice problems, and then you can check your answers in the notes on Google Classroom. And then in our next video, we are going to talk about degrees and radians.